there's a pressure to act quickly. A lot of utilities are getting pushed by the regulators and states and cities to get solutions fielded and get things out into the field to help address the wildfire issues.
As wildfire and extreme weather events become more frequent, the toll on communities and utilities is staggering. In 2023 alone, the U.S. faced more than $90 billion in damages from climate and weather-related disasters, while utilities that suffer major outages can face regulatory penalties, mounting restoration costs, and long-term reputational damage. Beyond the financial strain, these events disrupt lives, shutting down businesses, displacing families, and even threatening public safety. Against this backdrop, utilities face a critical challenge. How do you keep the lights on, safeguard your grid, and protect communities, all under the immense pressure and compressed timelines? Today, we're diving into this question from two key perspectives: the strategic product vision from an industry-leading software vendor and the utility field-facing implementation. How do we architect an operational control system that brings together the necessary real-time data into workflows? And how do we ensure that utility workers maximize the use of these advanced software tools in the heat of the moment? To help us dig into these topics, we're joined by Dan Lysaker, who is the Director of Product Design at Emerson's AspenTech Digital Grid Management business. With almost 7 years deploying mission-critical OT software across the globe with Emerson and over 10 years working at Xcel Energy, he's seen the full suite of what utility decision makers are faced with when it comes to hardening and bringing resilience and reliability to the real-time operation of the grid. And a quick reminder, you can catch every episode of Power Perspectives and Energy Central's other shows on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever else you regularly get your podcasts. Please take a moment to subscribe and leave us a comment or rating. And don't miss our other series you can find in these podcast feeds, including Pilot in the Future, where we learn about the latest in innovation. And I'm Jason Price, recording from New York City. And joining me as always is Matt Chester, Energy Central's community manager and podcast producer, coming to us from Orlando, Florida. Matt, what are the top questions and concerns from the community at energycentral.com as it relates to these challenges I spoke about?
Yeah, there's no shortage of them for sure. But I think from the Energy Central community, there are two major themes that come up time and again. First is utilities asking how can they realistically prepare for events that are growing more frequent and severe, and what does true resilience look like when the threats are evolving so quickly? And then second, there's a ton of discussion about balancing the technology investment, things like advanced grid management tools, automation. How do you balance that with the human element, making sure utility workers are equipped, empowered to respond effectively in the moment? And that balance between strategy, technology, and then ultimately execution, I think that's really at the heart of the conversation that I see a lot on the pages of energycentral.com. And then I'm expecting those will also come up in the conversation that we're having today.
And to do so, let's bring in Dan Lysaker. Welcome to Energy Central's Power Perspectives podcast.
Thanks, Jason. I really enjoy listening to the show, and I'm excited to be here with you today.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. So let's kick things off. So first off, please introduce the audience to Emerson's AspenTech Digital Grid Management business. Where do you play in the power and utility industry, and what does DGM make itself so special?
Yeah. Thanks for letting me set the context there. We've been around for over 30 years, and listeners might be familiar with us as OSI, or Open Systems International. About 5 years ago, we were acquired by Emerson, and have had a bit of a journey since that point. Now we're stable and fully settled here at Emerson under the AspenTech umbrella as the Digital Grid Management business unit. Key piece there is that the underlying technology and kind of what makes us special is still that OSI technology, our Monarch platform, and what we have built for over 30 years as a company. We're headquartered right here in Medina, Minnesota, which is a suburb just west of Minneapolis, and that's where the majority of our staff remains to be. We're very focused on real-time automation for utility grids, managing control centers, primarily electric, but also gas and water too. We serve utilities around the world. We've got over 450 customers, from small municipalities to some of the largest IOUs and market operators, country-level transmission systems. So with that, we offer a full-time integrated operational technologies suite, really covering everything from the generator to the meter. So that's GMS, transmission management systems, and then ADMS and everything that is entailed within the ADMS, getting into outage management, DER management, model management. I think one of the things that makes us special is the speed at which we can grow and scale our solutions and add new features and components to it. That platform that I mentioned has been growing organically over time, and it's allowed us to move very quickly and improving things or adding new technologies. So today, what I want to focus in on is our distribution management solution, really looking at the visualization and control of medium voltage electrical grids, specifically around our application for helping utilities manage risk associated with wildfires.
Yeah, and that's a major topic for all the utilities, no doubt. So when we talk to utilities today, what's the biggest wildfire risk pressure points you're hearing about?
It spans a lot of areas. Several key themes continue to come up. There's a pressure to act quickly. A lot of utilities are getting pushed by the regulators and states and cities to get solutions fielded and get things out into the field to help address the wildfire issues. They're looking for accurate real-time control, coupled with the integration of external data. There's a lot of inputs into this ecosystem to make a solution work correctly. So in many cases, they want to turn that data into actionable response within a software, such as an ADMS. Other utilities are looking into where they can home grow solutions or get something done very quickly. They require speed and accuracy of the response of the solution with auditability of the actions taken. One of the things we hear time and time again is the importance of being able to track when a red flag warning was given to them, what actions were taken, what response did they take, so that in the unhappy event where something does happen, they've got the paper trail there of information that shows that they took the measures that they could and did the appropriate things to try to mitigate the problem. Lastly, they need good communication paths to end consumers and stakeholders to pass along information about the actions that they're taking. And that's kind of got two components to it. One is the information that, they may be proactively shutting off power via a PSPS or a public safety power shutoff event, or just changing the way that the grid is operating, which may lead to more outages. And the second part of that is also because the utility is aware that it is a high risk fire day, red flag day, because of the weather variables and environmental variables. Part of that communications is also to reach out to all of their customers, which is everyone in that service territory, to let them know, hey, be considerate of the things you're doing, don't have a bonfire, stuff like that, to try to help with that proactive communication to help as a community avoid the problem or the risk of a wildfire. And part of that, kind of tying it all together, is that end-to-end system integration between data sources is pretty key and critical to success. There are a lot of components here, and so utilities are looking at ways to try to bring that all together.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the lessons learned from a lot of these wildfires is the breakdown in communication, the fragmentation of the different communication processes. So integration, interoperability, those are all key factors that utilities try to overcome. I'm kind of setting up I already gave the answer to some degree, but I'd love you to elaborate a little bit on what does it look like when utilities don't have that integration?
Yeah, we've talked to a number that have a lot of solutions in place, and those can vary pretty wildly. Or some will have their own tools, pulling in weather data from different teams, internal to the utility or external sources, and then try to come up with an idea or a decision what to do. We're going to manually disable devices. We've seen some cases where they've programmatically ganged points together to more or less allow for a single control to disable reclosing on a bunch of equipment. Those types of solutions are manually built and maintained. It would be looking at a certain area. I'm going to manually find all my reclosers and breakers that are in that area, add those things into a list, and then create a calc or sort of a custom solution to do the desired action, which in most cases is just disabling reclosing or enabling a hotline tag setting, which are very similar tools. They're investing a lot in solutions outside of the control room as well. And so what it really amounts to is a lot of solutions in place trying to address the problem, not really in a consolidated way. And so there's a lot of fragmentation there in what systems are doing what and where that information is. So that leads to something that we're worried that over time may be a less maintainable solution. For us, we believe that a model-based solution provides an additional layer of value to utilities, having that integrated real-time model at the foundation of the decision-making scheme, deciding when and where to initiate wildfire measures. Those homegrown solutions can be quite good and they can work well up front, and you can automate all sorts of stuff yourself. The challenge there is the maintenance over time. Anything that requires a user to keep it up, to maintain it. If you add a device, you remove a device, do switching, things change over time with the function of the distribution grid. And manually maintained solutions sort of inherently face a challenge to keep them running well over time.
All right. Well, I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, Emerson Corporate's leadership and strategy has looked at the landscape and seen the value in having an integration, more of a uniform process, and hence the acquisitions that it's made over time. So not to make a sales pitch here, but what does it look like when you do have this ADMS and system better embedded and integrated into the system, and having that, excuse the consulting speak, but the single pane of glass look like? What does it look like for the utility, and how does that benefit from not having it?
Right. When we see that there's a lot of benefit here in adding this into the landscape of the ADMS. Fundamentally, what we're trying to achieve, I don't think is that hard. Within the ADMS, we've already got advanced applications, Flizzr and Voltvar and other things that are running and have been running for many years on top of a network model, right? So the piece that we're layering in now is trying to pull in polygons that define the regions or zones that make up the service territory for any given utility, use a trusted data source to drive the fire risk severity, and then use the as-operated state of the model to determine which breakers and which reclosers protect the equipment within that fire zone. And then when the wildfire severity is high, or a red flag day, or whatever you trust to drive that decision-making, have the system take the appropriate action for the devices that are in that region. And so we really see it sitting alongside other advanced applications in the control center. For us, it was important to support utility needs as the demands and regulations on them continue to increase. The prevalence of wildfires in the industry is a pretty new issue, and it's expanded quite quickly from really just being sort of a California thing or a West Coast thing, and now has expanded pretty much throughout the country and rest of the world even too. We talk to customers in Europe where this was never really a notion. They're even being pressed to come up with strategies and things to mitigate wildfire there too. So given the dynamic nature of this and how fast it's evolved, we think that a centralized solution within the ADMS will really add value over time versus some of those custom solutions. So that single pane of glass that you mentioned, and the value of that is the ability to overlay the real-time electrical model with the fire data that can come from public sources like Watch Duty or FEMA or any number of other sources, internal meteorological teams to help determine what classifies risk severities and the risk threshold for any given utility in their service territory. Because many utilities cover vast service territories. So a red flag day may only exist in a small slice of their network. We can show exactly where those areas are to operators and ensure that the system or operator controls and actions taken adequately protect the areas that they need to without negatively impacting other areas of their service territory. So the single pane of glass really has to achieve two things. First, be able to pull all this information together for visibility and awareness, things like alarms and hotspot data, video feeds. And the second is the operational data that you need the system to act on. So those red flag day warnings, regional boundaries, status of devices, control of devices, changing settings, things of that nature. So it's really not just being able to aggregate all the information into one spot, but being able to distill that into actionable insights for quick response. The last point that I want to make on that one is having a centralized place to access the data about what happened. So when controls were sent, what actions were taken, when an alert was received, to tie back to that auditability point I made earlier. That becomes really, really paramount. You talked about the fines in the opening. The consequences, obviously, societal are massive from a wildfire. For a utility, also quite catastrophic within the damage to equipment and then the fines that might be imposed upon them. They need to have some proof there that, when an alarm was received, when the warnings were seen, and then what actions were taken over their certain geography to help minimize the risk and prove that they took the actions and the measures necessary to hopefully not be at fault for the wildfire.
Dan, you mentioned or you alluded to that about control centers, that they don't cover everything. That's only one part of the equation, if I understood correctly. At least that was you were suggesting. So what's missing? What are other solutions that need to be part of this? And just we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we know that solving this problem, or I guess it's hard to maybe solve it, but reducing the wildfire risk comes in a variety of different flavors. There are a number of solutions in and outside of the control room. Because of the urgency of getting solutions in place, really seems like everybody's trying to procure solutions and put things in place as quickly as they can. Which is great because it does take a number of things. From our company, we view this from the lens of the control room, from a kind of a SCADA-centric solution, looking at the model and taking actions that way. But we know that there are many measures being put in place that are outside of the control room. So that's from, hardening the grid, replacing poles and wires to be more resilient to trees when they fall, brush management and extra forestry efforts, relays that can detect falling wires, some very cool technology there that works in a lot of cases, to trip before a wire actually hits the ground, and so prevent the spark or the ignition that could happen there. We heard about one case where they've got there are these vibration sensing pole mounted cameras that when they detect vibration, so a disturbance happens somewhere on the wire, the cameras will turn on and start streaming so that somebody in the control center or in the engineering department can then see, okay, like what happened? Okay, we had a car hit a pole out here in a rural area. Do we have a wire down? Do we have an issue? That gives them the ability to then dispatch very quickly to the scene. So even if the centralized solution had disabled reclosing in that area, you still have a case where like the fault that gets caused could be a contact with the ground or with a tree. And so that type of a solution is really cool in being able to stream a camera feed and get faster access to information and get a first responder on site more quickly. There are some AI companies that are using cameras and satellites to detect smoke and try to triangulate things to relay information for early warning signs when a fire does start, try to then catch it faster. So there are a lot of types of solutions. We know that we're just one piece of that puzzle. One angle that we're trying to lean into is increasing the value of all those solutions, or by aggregating that data into the control room, into a centralized system, so that operators and the people that are running and managing the grid have access to all of the information from all of these different solutions that are in place to try to help solve this problem.
That's great. Thank you. Really appreciate the thorough response here. What I want to do now is I want to ask you about transmission versus distribution. Both are critical. Both your company plays a role in. Can you break down for us how do you look at both the T and the D, and what are the things that we should be thinking about? Yeah,
transmission offers some unique challenges in the vastness of how far the lines travel. One of the challenges from the control center side is that historically transmission lines are modeled and how an EMS is built. You actually don't really care that much geographically about where the equipment is. And so there's not that geospatial component to know that I have this 100-mile line and it traverses this territory that happens to go through an area or multiple areas that have certain fire risk profiles. So part of that is an expansion on the technology to add in that geographic modeling to have awareness of, okay, like where is this line traveling geographically within my service territory, and then layering in some of those risk profiles, which might sound like a pretty simple problem, but just sort of fundamentally how EMSs have been built and grown over time, that, the actual lat long of information has not been, or the lat long of devices hasn't been that important. So some expansion in technology there. Operationally, the transmission system gives you some different opportunities as well, which would be to try to actually proactively isolate those lines, reroute power from different directions and different transmission sources, where you can try to reduce risk altogether by de-energizing and taking lines out of service that go through high-risk zones. There are lessons learned there in the operation of how that works, where we're looking at starting to add those things to the distribution system as well, too, where you can really think about, can we reroute power, or can we think about how we're running our distribution system to learn from some of the lessons from the transmission. A scenario comes to mind of how we layer in technologies here is my prior role. I remember there was a community very long at the end of a very long radial line. That line went through very heavily wooded, treed, hilly area, very hard to get to. So at that time, they were just experiencing reliability problems. So anytime you have a long radial through trees, when storms happen, you're going to have power problems. That's just sort of the nature of the thing. So we put in a microgrid at that community so that when there was an outage, they had backup power and community outreach to tell people when they were on their backup and to conserve energy, but it would keep the lights on for, 24, 48 hours. Now, if you fast forward in time, now we have this new problem. We've got wildfire risk problems. You can use that same technology now, actually have the community isolate themselves, go on their microgrid, isolate that line, and use the same community outreach components that you built before for a different but sort of similar use case, and now are leveraging and stacking and adding value from those technologies to solve a new challenge.
Sounds like a bit of a pricey exercise to maintain resilience, but all right, I want to ask you about, let's put it this way. You have a really interesting background. You didn't go into some of your international, focus and the work you've done and just the studies you've done outside the United States and outside of North America. And I want to bring that in. So talk to us about what lessons learned have you seen with your, the technology and the evolution of utilities and modernization of it, comparing, what's going on outside North America, and what should, American utility leaders think about and pay attention to, given some of these lessons that are learned and practices that are going on outside North America? Yeah,
one region that we would suggest that folks keep an eye on is Australia. Australia is I think fairly advanced in their operation of the electric grid. They're also advanced is maybe the wrong word, but they're ahead of us on the severity of their extreme weather. Very, very, very hot summers, real high risk of wildfires, and it's something they've been battling with, I think, for longer than we have here. So I think they've got some more mature solutions put in place on the technology side as well as the policy side and the regulatory side. And that even gets into some of the more granular areas around DER penetration, which I think is sort of tangentially related to the topic here today. They have areas of extremely, extremely high penetrations of solar, and they're working towards policy for specific controls and regulations to allow for what they call dynamic operating envelopes or DOEs to manage the output of those solar panels to maintain grid reliability and stability. All of those things amount to try to make the grid more reliable and more sustainable. In a lot of ways, we see that they're kind of leading the way and how they're solving complex challenges in the distribution grid. I really see that kind of as a partnership between their regulatory bodies and then the utilities that are putting the solutions in place. And it just seems to be a more frictionless environment for navigating and implementing solutions over there. In Europe, interestingly, there's been a lot of attention made to faster response on isolation of faults. They've got compensated delta systems there, and so their operations of the grid in some parts of Europe are a lot different, and did that historically for reliability purposes. Now it exposes different challenges because in some cases default may be present or active in the system for a longer period of time, and then they're looking at ways to find and isolate that fault much faster. But it's a kind of a different fundamental problem than how we viewed FLISR and feeder isolation and restoration here in a North American style grid. It was a little different of a problem there. And so it's been one of the neat things about where we sit in the industry and the relationships we get to have is that we deploy systems all over the world. And so we get to have these conversations with utilities really in all regions, especially in the advancing and modern areas of the world.
I usually keep my compliments until the end, but I'm just really impressed with all the background and perspective you have in this industry. So it's really thrilled to have you here. But I'm going to pause for a moment. We're going to switch gears now. We have something called the lightning round, which gives us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about you, Dan, the person, rather than you, the professional. So we're going to bring Matt back in, throw a series of questions at you. We ask you to keep your response to one phrase or a brief response. And are you ready?
I'm ready.
Great. So Dan, what is your ideal vacation spot?
So this one's pretty easy for me. It's the Boundary Waters canoe area. I think it's, to me, is the best possible place on earth to go and fully disconnect. Fishing, camping, hiking, no phones, no internet. It's the best.
I think we all need that these days. Something else we all need is comfort food. So what's your go-to comfort food?
For me, it's ice cream and a waffle cone, usually half something cookie dough and have something really chocolatey.
What would you pick as your superpower if you had a chance to choose one?
I've always struggled with this one. I think it would be the ability to fly. When I was younger, I liked to do like cliff jumping or bridge diving, and so I think the ability to take that off and actually fly out of there would be pretty fun.
One of the things we've been doing is allowing past guests to leave questions in the lightning round for our future guests. So we have one for you that Rusty Williams of UTC left, and he asked, what is one career mulligan that you would like to take? You know, the one thing that if you could look back across your career that you wish you did differently.
You know, that's a great question. For me, maybe a curveball to the answer. I'm going to say nothing. Any mistakes I made in the past were things that I've been able to learn and grow from, and there are opportunities to do better. Been pretty blessed by the career I've had, and I think that all the components of your career shape that journey, and that includes the oopses.
What's a lightning round question that now you want to leave for one of our future guests?
So I'm really excited about the opportunity that small modular reactors are going to bring to the table as a method of sustainable and emissions-free energy. So I think my question there is for the next guest will be, will nuclear energy ever get over its stigma to become a standard core energy source for us?
And then lastly, one of our favorite questions to ask people is just, what are you most motivated by? What gets you out of bed?
Kind of relates to the last couple answers there. For me, there's the transition to clean energy, or a clean energy future for humanity is one of the most important and one of the most complex endeavors that we've ever undertaken. It's going to take numerous people around the globe, a lot of different areas to create multiple sustainable paths for future generations. And so I'm pretty motivated that I get to wake up and come to work every day and play a small part in that, helping utilities make making electricity delivery more reliable, more efficient, more sustainable. That really gives meaning to every day of work for me, and a career that I'm truly grateful for.
That's great. Nice job. I will point out, though, that, you know, having the power to fly does require lots of energy and attention. And you could just fly first class and read a book or have a cocktail and watch a movie. So, you know, there's something to be said about, you know, having the power to fly. Don't forget that. All right. On that, though, I liked all the responses. And since you performed so beautifully in the pivot round, we want to give you the final word. So knowing that you have an industry audience listening in today's conversation and may or may not agree with the flying power, but that aside, what would you like the audience to take away from today's convo?
I guess two angles for me. For utilities, it's to move quickly. We deal with a lot of solvable problems, and we tend to get in our own way as an industry. So that's, I think, on the utility side, it's to try to get out of your own way and let's work together, let's solve problems together. A lot of opportunities out there to get things and solutions in place. The other side of that, for regulators, I would encourage them to find ways to partner with your utilities. We work in a lot of states where the regulatory to utility relationship is really good and really positive. There are some states and areas, not to name any names, but some states where that regulatory environment is pretty tough for utilities. That makes implementing new technology and solutions pretty difficult. We need to work together to reduce barriers for more grid automation, more intelligence, and not add to barriers that are blocking that stuff from being implemented. With extreme weather being the norm and the rate of change in our industry as the electric grid changes and electrification changes, we really don't have a lot of time to implement solutions at scale before, you know, more and more catastrophic things are bound to happen. And so that's my encouragement to the audience is to, especially if you're in a place where the environment with interveners and regulators is pretty rough. Let's find ways to work together to try to reduce some of the friction and get solutions in place faster.
I would agree. And when it comes to grid modernization, no doubt. I mean, you and your company are really tip of spear driving a lot of this. So great guest to have on and share the insights. So thank you again, Dan, for joining us today's episode. We really appreciate it. And we really appreciate you coming back at some time in the future to learn more of what's going on at
Thanks, Jason. Would love to be back. Really appreciate the time and enjoyed the conversation. So thank you. And I really look forward to participating in the discourse after the episode as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have an active membership, so you can always reach Dan through the Energy Central platform where he welcomes your questions and comments. And we'll see you soon. Thank you again.
Thanks, Jason.
All right, very cool. So, Matt, what did you take away from today's conversation with Dan?
Well, there was a lot. It's hard to pick just one, but I think the one that's been buzzing with me since he said it was just this whole idea of looking at wildfire solutions, not just in the field on the physical grid, but in the control room. I think when we look at the biggest wildfires and how often those do get tied to the utility business, there's this natural inclination to try to point fingers and assign the blame and figure out, well, how do we harden that physical grid so that initial spark doesn't happen? And obviously that's still critical and important, but it kind of highlighted to me how that's also a bit of a simplistic view of both wildfire prevention and also mitigation once it's happening, and him talking about the control room solutions and what can be done from that central hub in a more digital way, again, to prevent it, to identify potential issues and then prevent them later on. I think that's important as a takeaway for, maybe it's just me, but I tend to fall for that. Where did that physical blip happen? And it said, all right, well, let's look at the full court press. How can we really address everything we need to? Because the wildfires, they are so damaging. They are, they lead to such tragedies. So anywhere where you can turn the dial a little bit more to enhance prevention and increase control, that's valuable. So I was fascinated to hear him talk about that. Anything stick out to you very especially?
Well, I'm always interested in what's going on outside of North America. It's sort of like keeps us in check or keeps us honest to some degree, right? And there are markets around the world that are more mature than we are, so they tend to be, or at least I think of them as like potentially like the model to follow or the North Star. So in this case, we've had guests from Australia before, and he referenced Australia right away, which was interesting. It seems to be a country that has figured out a way to standardize to some degree, figure out a way to overcome like jurisdictional differences, because as I understand, there are jurisdictional differences across the country. It's not one whole country, from what I recall. So from that standpoint, the importance of integration and interoperability, things we discussed, especially when it comes down to wildfires. And I don't know if Australia has the wildfires like we've seen over the past recent years, but they do have brush fires and other sorts of fire risks, so they're not immune to it. But they, according to him, Dan, they've figured out some of this better than we have because they're less fragmented, less jurisdictional prone, and put more emphasis on the standardizations and interoperability and communications that we tend to be missing. We look at only from a utility versus utility standpoint. So anyways, I thought that was something of interest. And will go back that, flying, having the power to fly is a lot of work. It's a big workout, I would imagine. So, anyone who argues with me on that, happy to have that conversation.
Yeah. And hey, if that's the conversation you want to have on energycentral.com, we can have it there. You also heard Dan say that he'll be on the pages of Energy Central. So if there's any questions or comments from him that you have for him in the audience, whether about the wildfire prevention or the ideal superpower, leave them in the comments there. We'll have in the show notes the link directly to where we're posting that. And let us know what you're thinking, what you're hearing. Feel free to always reach out to us in those comments, or you can reach out to me directly at mchester@energycentral.com. We want to keep hearing from you and make sure we're telling the stories that the Energy Central audience wants to hear.
And on that note, I want to thank our sponsor of today's show, Emerson's Aspen Technology DGM business, which has offered industry-leading control and automation software for the power and utility industry for over 30 years. Once again, I'm your host, Jason Price. So plug in and stay fully charged in the discussion by hopping into the community at energycentral.com, and we'll see you next time at the Energy Central Power Perspectives Podcast.